The rain had been falling for hours, washing the streets of London in silver reflections. Adrian Cole stood silently outside the apartment he had called home for 3 years. In one hand, he held a small paper bag containing flowers he had bought on his way home. In the other was a tiny velvet box. Inside it was an engagement ring. Tonight was supposed to be the night he asked Emily to spend the rest of her life with him. His heart was racing, not from fear, but from excitement. He imagined her smile, the tears in her eyes, the hug that would begin the next chapter of their lives. Every dream he had built over the past 3 years seemed only a few steps away. Then he noticed something strange. The apartment door wasn't fully closed. A warm light spilled into the hallway. He smiled, assuming Emily had forgotten to lock it. As he gently pushed the door open, a sound stopped him cold. Laughter. Not just Emily's laughter. A man's voice answered it. A voice Adrian knew better than his own. Daniel, his best friend. The man he had trusted like a brother. Adrian's footsteps became slower. Every breath felt heavier than the last. The hallway suddenly seemed longer than it had ever been before. His heartbeat echoed so loudly that it drowned out every other sound. He reached the living room, and time stopped. Emily sat on the sofa, smiling into Daniel's eyes. His hand rested gently on hers. They looked comfortable, familiar, like two people who had stopped hiding. The flowers slipped from Adrian's fingers. The engagement ring fell to the wooden floor with a tiny metallic sound. Neither Emily nor Daniel noticed it at first. When they finally looked toward the doorway, the smiles disappeared from their faces. No one spoke. No one moved. 3 lives changed in absolute silence. Adrian stared at the 2 people he loved most in the world. The pain wasn't like a knife. It was worse. It was as if the ground beneath his entire life had disappeared. Every memory suddenly felt like a lie. Every promise sounded empty. Every dream collapsed without making a sound. At that moment, Adrian had 2 choices. He could let anger control him, or he could discover a way of thinking that had helped ordinary people, soldiers, kings, and emperors survive betrayal, loss, and unimaginable pain for over 2,000 years. Life doesn't ask whether you're ready for pain. It only asks what you'll do next. Most people believe Stoicism teaches you to become cold, emotionless, or indifferent. It doesn't. Stoicism doesn't tell you to stop feeling pain. It teaches you not to let pain become the author of your life. Adrian didn't know it yet, but the worst night of his life was about to become the beginning of his greatest transformation. Because sometimes the deepest betrayal leads to the strongest soul. A few weeks passed, and Adrian slowly began to notice that something had changed. Emily no longer smiled the way she used to. Their conversations became shorter. She often stared at her phone, quickly locking the screen whenever he walked into the room. When he asked if everything was okay, she would smile faintly and say, "I'm just tired." Adrian wanted to believe her. He loved her. And love has a strange way of convincing us that everything is fine even when our heart quietly whispers that it isn't. Daniel had changed, too. The friend who never missed a weekend dinner suddenly became too busy. He cancelled plans at the last minute. Sometimes he wouldn't answer Adrian's calls for hours, only to send a short message later saying he had fallen asleep or forgotten to charge his phone. None of the excuses sounded convincing, but Adrian never challenged them. Instead, he searched for reasons that would protect the people he loved. Maybe Emily was under pressure at work. Maybe Daniel was dealing with personal problems. Maybe he was simply overthinking. Every night, his mind replayed the same questions. Did I do something wrong? Am I not giving her enough attention? Why does everything suddenly feel different? The more he searched for answers, the more exhausted he became. Then one evening, while sitting alone in his apartment, Adrian opened the old Stoicism book he had recently started reading. One sentence caught his attention. You cannot control another person's choices. You can only control your own. He stared at those words for several minutes. For the first time, he realized something that most people spend years refusing to accept. No amount of love can force loyalty. No amount of kindness can make someone honest. And no amount of worry can change a decision another person has already made. Stoicism teaches that another person's actions belong to them, not to you. You are responsible for your own character. They are responsible for theirs. The moment you try to control someone else's heart, you surrender control of your own peace. Adrian wasn't ready to understand that lesson completely. Not yet, but soon, life would force him to, and it would happen in the most painful way imaginable. Have you ever spent months trying to understand someone who never intended to explain themselves? If you have, then you already know how heavy that silence can become. And Adrian was only one step away from discovering the truth that would change his life forever. The following Friday, Adrian left the office earlier than usual. A mysterious message had been sitting in his mind all afternoon. Go home early today. There was no name, No explanation, just 6 words that refused to leave his thoughts. As he drove home through the rain, he tried to convince himself it was nothing. Maybe Emily had planned a surprise. Maybe Daniel had stopped by for dinner. He laughed at himself for worrying so much, but the closer he got to the apartment, the heavier his chest became. When he reached the front door, he immediately noticed something unusual. The door wasn't completely closed. A thin line of warm light stretched into the hallway. His heart began to race. Slowly, he pushed the door open. At first, all he heard was laughter. Emily's laughter, then another voice. Daniel, his best friend. Adrian walked toward the living room, each step feeling heavier than the last. As he turned the corner, the world he had spent years building collapsed in a single moment. Emily and Daniel sat together on the sofa. Daniel's hand rested gently over hers. Their faces were only inches apart. Neither of them expected Adrian to be standing there. The room fell silent. Emily's face turned pale. Daniel quickly pulled his hand away. Adrian, Emily whispered, her voice trembling. It's not what you think. Daniel stood up immediately. Mate, please, let me explain. But Adrian didn't hear another word. His ears rang. His breathing became shallow. The flowers he had bought for Emily slipped from his hand and scattered across the wooden floor. The small velvet box followed. The engagement ring rolled across the room before stopping beneath the coffee table. For a long moment, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Adrian looked at the woman he wanted to spend his life with. Then he looked at the man he had trusted like a brother. He realized that the betrayal had begun long before this moment. This was simply the first time reality had revealed itself. Without raising his voice, Adrian looked at them both and said quietly, "You don't need to explain what I've already seen." Then he turned around and walked toward the door. Emily called his name. Daniel followed him for a few steps, but Adrian never looked back. Outside, the rain continued to fall. He stood alone on the empty street, staring into the darkness. In that moment, he understood one of the hardest truths in life. Reality is not cruel. It simply exists. The pain wasn't created by what he had witnessed. The pain came from watching the future he had imagined disappear in front of his eyes. For years, Adrian had been in love with a picture of tomorrow, a wedding, a family, growing old with Emily. In less than a minute, that picture was gone. Stoicism teaches that healing cannot begin until reality is accepted. Not the reality we wish existed, the reality that actually does. Because the truth, no matter how painful, is always lighter than living inside an illusion. Adrian didn't know how to heal yet. He didn't know where he would sleep that night. He didn't know what tomorrow would look like. But one thing had become impossible to deny. The life he thought he had, no longer existed. And accepting that truth would become the first real step toward becoming the man he was meant to be. Emily's voice echoed behind him. "Adrian, please don't leave. Let me explain." Daniel took another step forward, his face filled with panic. "Mate, it's not what it looks like." Adrian stopped for just a second. Not because he wanted answers, but because he wanted to remember this moment exactly as it was. He slowly turned around and looked at them one last time. The woman he had planned to marry, the friend he had trusted like family, both standing in the middle of a room filled with broken promises. For a brief moment, anger surged through him. He imagined shouting. He imagined demanding the truth. He imagined asking the question that haunts almost everyone after betrayal, why? But deep inside, another thought appeared. Would any answer change what he had just seen? Would an apology erase the image burned into his memory? Would anger rebuild the trust that had already been destroyed? The answer was no. Adrian took a slow breath. His voice was calm, almost whispering. "You've already made your choice." Emily burst into tears. "I'm so sorry." Daniel lowered his head, unable to meet Adrian's eyes. But Adrian didn't wait for another excuse. He simply nodded once. Then he turned around and walked out of the apartment. The hallway felt endless. Every step echoed against the walls. Behind him, he could hear Emily crying. He could hear Daniel calling his name. But he never looked back. Outside, the cold rain hit his face. For the first time since opening that apartment door, he could breathe. Not because the pain was gone, but because he had chosen not to let that room become the place where he lost himself. Many people believe strength means winning an argument. They believe the loudest voice is the strongest one. Stoicism teaches something very different. The strongest response is often no response. Silence is not weakness. Silence is choosing not to give your peace to people who have already taken enough from you. Adrian understood that shouting would only satisfy his anger for a few minutes. Walking away would protect his dignity for the rest of his life. Sometimes the greatest victory isn't proving someone wrong. It's refusing to become someone you're not. That night, Adrian lost the woman he loved. He lost the friend he trusted, but he refused to lose his character. And in the years ahead, he would realize that protecting his character was the most valuable thing he had left. Leaving that apartment took courage, but it wasn't the hardest battle he would face, because walking away from betrayal is only the first step. Living with the memories, that was the battle that truly tested him. Adrian didn't know where he was going. He simply walked. The rain soaked his clothes until they clung to his body. Cars splashed through puddles beside him. People hurried home with umbrellas, laughing, talking, living ordinary lives. No one noticed the man whose world had just fallen apart. After nearly 2 hours of wandering through the city, Adrian found himself standing beside the River Thames. The lights of London shimmered across the dark water, but to him, the city had never looked so empty. He spotted an old wooden bench facing the river and slowly sat down. For the first time that night, he stopped moving. The silence around him was overwhelming. Without the distraction of walking, every memory came rushing back. Emily's first smile in the cafe, their weekend trips, the apartment they had decorated together, the late-night conversations about marriage, the future they had planned. Then, the image of Emily and Daniel on the sofa. It replayed over and over again, as if his mind refused to let it go. Adrian lowered his head into his hands. His shoulders began to shake. For the first time in years, he cried, not because he was weak, but because he was human. The tears came quietly. There was no one to comfort him, no one to tell him everything would be okay. Only the sound of rain falling into the river. Minutes passed, then an hour. Eventually, Adrian looked up at the dark sky and whispered a question that millions of broken hearts have asked before him. Why wasn't I enough? The river did not answer. Neither did the night. Sometimes life doesn't explain itself. Sometimes it simply asks us to keep walking. As Adrian sat there in silence, he remembered another sentence from the Stoic book he had been reading. Pain is inevitable. Suffering is optional. At first, those words had sounded cold, almost impossible. How could suffering be optional when his heart felt completely shattered? But the more he thought about it, the more he began to understand. Stoicism never says you shouldn't cry. It never says you shouldn't grieve. It never tells you to pretend that betrayal doesn't hurt. Pain is real. Loss is real. Sadness is real. Stoicism simply warns us about something even more dangerous, turning temporary pain into a permanent identity. There is a difference between saying, I am hurting today, and saying, I will always be broken. One is a feeling, the other is a prison. That night, Adrian allowed himself to cry. He didn't hide his emotions. He didn't pretend to be strong, because true strength isn't refusing to feel pain. True strength is refusing to let pain become the only story you ever tell yourself. He sat on that bench until the rain finally began to slow. Then he stood up. His heart wasn't healed. His questions weren't answered. His life wasn't magically fixed, but he had survived the worst night of his life. And sometimes, surviving is the first victory. If you're listening to this story right now, perhaps you're carrying a memory that still hurts. Maybe someone betrayed your trust. Maybe someone walked away without explaining why. Maybe years have passed, yet the pain still visits you when the world becomes quiet. If that's you, remember this. Your pain is real, but it does not have to become your permanent home. You are allowed to grieve. You are allowed to cry. Just don't build a life inside yesterday's heartbreak, because even the longest night eventually gives way to morning. And although Adrian couldn't see it yet, a new chapter of his life was already beginning. One that would teach him the greatest Stoic lesson of all, that the mind can become stronger than any wound the heart has ever suffered. The days that followed were the hardest Adrian had ever lived. He rented a small room above an old bakery on the other side of the city. It was barely large enough for a bed, a wooden chair, and a narrow desk facing a single window. The walls were empty, the silence overwhelming. Every morning, he woke before sunrise. For a few brief seconds, everything felt normal. Then reality returned. Emily was gone. Daniel was gone. And the life he had spent years building no longer existed. The memories followed him everywhere. While making coffee, he remembered how Emily used to steal the first sip from his mug. On the train to work, he remembered the mornings Daniel used to joke about being late. At lunch, he found himself staring at an empty chair across the table. Even the smallest things became reminders of what he had lost. His mind replayed the betrayal over and over again. He remembered the apartment door, the laughter, the flowers falling from his hand, the engagement ring rolling across the wooden floor. Every detail returned as clearly as if it were happening again. Sometimes he replayed the scene 10 times a day. Sometimes 50. Every replay reopened the wound. One Saturday afternoon, unable to bear the noise inside his own head, Adrian wandered into the same second-hand bookstore where he had bought the old Stoic book. The elderly owner smiled as he recognized him. Back again? Adrian nodded. I think I need to understand it this time. The old man smiled gently. Then don't rush the words. Let them change you. That evening, Adrian sat by the window with a cup of black coffee and opened Meditations once again. As he slowly turned the pages, one sentence caught his attention. It was simple, short, but it felt as though it had been written for him. You have power over your mind, not outside events. He read it once, then again, and again. For several minutes, he couldn't turn the page. Those 12 words forced him to confront a truth he had been avoiding. He couldn't change what Emily had done. He couldn't erase Daniel's betrayal. He couldn't go back to that apartment and rewrite history. No amount of anger, no amount of regret, no amount of sleepless nights, would ever change a single second of the past. But there was one thing still within his control, his own mind. He realized that every time he replayed the betrayal, he was allowing the past to steal another piece of his present. Emily and Daniel had betrayed him once, but he had been betraying himself every day by reliving that moment over and over again. That realization shook him, not because it blamed him for the betrayal, but because it reminded him that healing begins when we stop giving yesterday permission to control today. The next morning, Adrian decided to try something different. Whenever the painful memory appeared, he didn't fight it. He didn't feed it. He simply noticed it. He took a slow breath, then gently brought his attention back to whatever he was doing. If he was drinking coffee, he focused on the warmth of the cup. If he was walking, he focused on each step. If he was working, he focused on the drawing in front of him. At first, it lasted only a few seconds before the memories returned. But each day became a little easier. Not because the memories disappeared, but because they no longer controlled every hour of his life. For the first time since the betrayal, Adrian felt something he hadn't experienced in weeks. A moment of peace. Only a few seconds, but it was enough to give him hope. Stoicism doesn't promise that painful memories will vanish. It teaches something far more valuable. You cannot always choose your first thought, but you can choose whether to keep entertaining it. The mind is like a garden. If you water bitterness every day, bitterness grows. If you water wisdom, patience, and discipline, those become stronger instead. Adrian finally understood that healing wasn't about forgetting. It was about deciding which thoughts deserved his attention. The betrayal would always be part of his past, but it no longer had to become his future. That single sentence from Marcus Aurelius became the foundation of a completely different life. A life built not on the actions of other people, but on the strength of his own character. And although Adrian couldn't see it yet, this one idea transformed a broken man into someone nobody could break again. The first few weeks after the betrayal felt like a constant battle. Not against Emily, not against Daniel, but against his own thoughts. Every morning, Adrian woke up with the same temptation. He wanted to know what they were doing. Were they still together? Did they regret what they had done? Were they happy? His phone seemed to whisper those questions every time he picked it up. One search, one look at Emily's social media, one glance at Daniel's profile. It would only take a few seconds. His thumb hovered over the screen more than once, but each time, he remembered the words he had read in Meditations. You have power over your mind, not outside events. He slowly locked the phone and placed it face down on the table. For a moment, he felt defeated. Then he realized something. Every minute spent watching their lives was a minute stolen from building his own. That morning, instead of opening social media, Adrian tied his running shoes. The streets were still dark as he stepped outside. The cold morning air filled his lungs. At first, running didn't make him feel stronger. It simply made him too tired to think. One step became another. 1 mile became 2. With every run, his body grew stronger, and so did his mind. The next week, he joined a small neighborhood gym. The first workout was painful. His muscles burned. His hands shook as he lifted weights. But unlike emotional pain, this pain had a purpose. Every drop of sweat reminded him that growth always demands discomfort. Soon, discipline became his new routine. He woke before sunrise. He ran. He worked out. He ate healthier meals. He returned home and spent an hour reading Stoic philosophy before going to bed. At work, he stopped doing the bare minimum. Instead of leaving exactly at 5, he stayed a little longer to improve his designs. He volunteered for projects that others avoided. His manager noticed the change. One afternoon, she stopped by his desk. "I don't know what's different about you lately," she said with a smile, "but your work has reached another level." Adrian simply thanked her. She didn't know that every blueprint he completed was helping rebuild something much more important than a career. It was rebuilding him. Slowly, people around him began to notice. His co-workers saw a man who appeared calmer. His neighbors noticed the man who never missed his morning run. The owner of the bakery downstairs smiled every morning as Adrian stopped for a black coffee before work. Life wasn't becoming easier. Adrian was becoming stronger. One evening, an old friend invited him out for dinner. During the conversation, the friend asked the question everyone else had been afraid to also ask, "So, do you ever think about getting revenge?" Adrian smiled for a moment before answering. "I used to." He looked out the restaurant window as people walked by under the city lights. "Then I realized something. If I spend my life trying to hurt the people who hurt me, they are still controlling my future." His friend remained silent. Adrian continued, "The best revenge isn't making them suffer. It's making sure they no longer have the power to stop me from becoming the man I want to be." That night, when he returned home, he opened his journal and wrote a sentence across the top of a blank page. "The best revenge is becoming someone your pain cannot recognize." He looked at those words for a long time. For the first time since the betrayal, he wasn't living to prove something to Emily. He wasn't trying to make Daniel jealous. He wasn't hoping either of them would regret losing him. He was changing for himself. That is one of the greatest lessons Stoicism teaches. Revenge keeps your attention on the past. Discipline invests your attention in the future. One path leaves you bitter, the other makes you better. Every sunrise became an opportunity to improve by one small step. One more page read, one more mile run, one more honest day's work, one more victory over the mind that once wanted to give up. Months earlier, Adrian had believed his life ended the moment he opened that apartment door. Now, he was beginning to understand something remarkable. Sometimes, losing everything that distracts you is the very thing that allows you to discover who you really are. And although Adrian had learned to control his actions, there was still one question buried deep inside him. A question that millions of broken hearts continue asking long after the pain has faded. Why did this happen to me? The answer to that question would become the next lesson on his journey toward true freedom. 6 months passed. The seasons changed. The cold winter mornings slowly gave way to the warmth of spring. The city looked the same, but Adrian didn't. His alarm still rang at 5:30 every morning. He still ran through the quiet streets before sunrise. He still spent an hour reading before work. His body had become stronger. His mind had become calmer. Even his colleagues noticed the difference. The man who once carried sadness in his eyes now carried quiet confidence. The betrayal had not disappeared from his memory, but it no longer controlled his every thought. One Saturday morning, Adrian returned to the bench beside the River Thames, the same bench where he had spent the worst night of his life. The river flowed exactly as it had months before. People walked past with coffee in their hands. Cyclists rode by. Children laughed as they chased pigeons along the walkway. Life had continued moving forward, and for the first time, so had he. As he sat there, he smiled gently to himself, not because he was happy about what had happened, but because he had survived it. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the small journal he carried everywhere. Inside were pages filled with lessons, reflections, and promises he had written to himself during the hardest months of his life. He flipped back to one of the first pages. Across the top, written in shaky handwriting, were 3 questions. Why me? Why did she do it? Why wasn't I enough? He stared at those words for a long time. He remembered how those questions had consumed him. Every night, every morning, every quiet moment, he had searched for answers that never came. Then he turned to the last page of the journal. Only one question was written there. What now? Adrian smiled. That single question had changed everything. He finally understood that the past was no longer asking anything of him. It wasn't waiting to be explained. It wasn't waiting to be changed. Only he was refusing to leave it behind. Stoicism teaches that some questions have no useful answers. You may never know why someone betrayed you. You may never understand why love suddenly disappeared. You may never hear the apology you deserve. And if you spend your entire life chasing those answers, you give your future away to a past that can never answer back. Adrian closed the journal and looked across the river. He realized something that Marcus Aurelius had been trying to teach him all along. Life isn't asking, why did this happen? Life is asking, what will you become because it happened? That is where true healing begins. Not when the pain disappears, not when someone apologizes, but when your attention shifts from what you've lost to who you're becoming. The betrayal had taken away Adrian's relationship. It had taken away his closest friendship. It had even taken away the future he once imagined. But it had also given him something unexpected: discipline, patience, wisdom, a deeper understanding of himself. He wasn't the same man who had stood in that apartment holding an engagement ring. He was becoming someone stronger, someone who no longer depended on other people for his peace, someone who understood that character is built during life's hardest moments. If you're listening to this story, maybe you've spent months, or even years, asking yourself the same painful questions. Why me? Why did they leave? Why wasn't I enough? Perhaps it's time to ask a different question. Not, why did this happen? But, what can I become because of it? Because the moment you stop searching for explanations, you finally have the freedom to start creating a new future. And Adrian was about to discover that true freedom doesn't always come from getting answers. Sometimes, it comes from no longer needing them. Nearly a year had passed since Adrian walked out of that apartment. His life looked different now. He had been promoted at work after leading the design of a major commercial project. His mornings still began began before sunrise, his evenings still ended with a book and quiet reflection. The pain that had once consumed every hour of his day had faded into something distant, a memory rather than a wound. One Friday evening, after finishing work, Adrian decided to stop at a small bookstore near Covent Garden. He spent nearly an hour browsing the philosophy section before buying a new journal and a copy of Seneca's essays. As he stepped back onto the busy street, people hurried past in every direction. Then, he saw her, Emily. She was standing outside a cafe only a few yards away. For a moment, Adrian wasn't sure if it was really her. She looked almost the same long brown hair, the same gentle smile, but there was something different in her eyes. She looked tired, as if life had also been teaching her difficult lessons. Emily noticed him at almost the same moment. Their eyes met across the crowded sidewalk. She froze. For a second, neither of them moved. Then she slowly walked toward him. Adrian. Her voice was quiet. I didn't think I'd ever see you again. Adrian smiled politely. Hello, Emily. There was an awkward silence between them. The kind of silence that carries hundreds of unspoken words. Emily looked down at the ground before speaking again. I've wanted to call you so many times. I wanted to explain everything. Adrian listened without interrupting. I know I hurt you, she continued. I know I don't deserve it, but I was hoping maybe you'd let me explain. Months earlier, those words would have meant everything to him. He had spent countless nights imagining this exact conversation. He had dreamed about hearing the reasons, the excuses, the apologies. He believed they would finally give him peace. But standing there now, something surprised him. He no longer needed them. He looked at Emily with kindness, not bitterness. Then he spoke softly. There was a time when I thought I needed answers. I believed that if I understood why it happened, the pain would disappear. He paused for a moment, but I was wrong. Emily looked at him, searching for something in his eyes, but she found only stillness. Adrian continued, his voice steady. I've learned that some questions don't have answers that can heal you, and even if they do, they can't change what already happened. A tear rolled down Emily's cheek, catching the light. I'm sorry, Adrian. I truly am. Adrian nodded gently, his expression softening. I believe you. Those three words seemed to startle her. She took a small, hesitant step closer, as if testing the space between them. Can you ever forgive me? Adrian looked toward the busy street. People continued walking, lost in their own worlds. Cars passed by, blurring into streaks of light. Life moved forward, indifferent to the history standing on this sidewalk. Then, he smiled. I forgave you a long time ago. Emily's eyes filled with tears, her voice barely a whisper. Really? Yes. Not because what happened was okay, but because I didn't want to carry that weight anymore. He looked back at her, his gaze clear. Forgiveness wasn't a gift I gave you. It was a gift I gave myself. Emily covered her mouth, her shoulders shaking as she quietly cried. For the first time since the day everything fell apart, Adrian felt no surge of anger. He felt no lingering regret. He didn't even feel sadness. He simply felt peace. They spoke for a few more minutes about ordinary things, work, life, the passing of time. When the conversation finally drifted to a close, Emily offered a faint, tired smile. I'm glad you're doing well. So am I, Adrian replied. Then, they said goodbye. No dramatic exit. No lingering embrace. No hollow promises to meet again. Just two people turning and walking in different directions, back into the rhythm of their own lives. As Adrian continued down the street, he realized something profound. For almost a year, he had believed that his peace was held hostage by another person's choices. He thought he needed an apology. He thought he needed answers. He thought he needed closure to move on. But Stoicism had taught him a different truth. Closure isn't something someone gives to you. It's something you decide to claim for yourself. Peace doesn't arrive when someone finally explains their betrayal. Peace begins the moment you stop making your healing dependent on the people who broke you. Adrian never received all the answers he once desperately wanted. He never learned every detail of what had happened behind his back. And strangely, it no longer mattered, because healing had never been waiting inside Emily's explanation. It had been waiting inside Adrian's own decision to move forward. If you are still waiting for someone to apologize, if you are waiting for the perfect explanation to make sense of your pain, or hoping that one final conversation will finally set you free, remember this: your peace does not require another person's permission. It begins the moment you decide that your future is worth more than your past. And Adrian's greatest lesson was still waiting for him, because finding peace is powerful, but becoming truly unshakable, that is where Stoicism reaches its highest purpose. The meeting with Emily stayed in Adrian's mind for several days, not because it reopened old wounds, but because it showed him just how much he had changed. A year earlier, he had imagined that moment 1,000 different ways. In some versions, he shouted. In others, he demanded answers. Sometimes, he imagined walking away in a cold, calculated silence. But the reality had been completely different. There had been no fight. fire, no burning desire for revenge. Only a quiet, steady peace he never thought he would find. One Sunday morning, Adrian returned to the small park where he often read before beginning his day. The trees swayed rhythmically in the morning breeze. Children laughed in the distance, their voices bright against the quiet. Birds landed near the old wooden bench where he sat, his journal resting on his knees. He opened to a blank, crisp page. For several minutes, he stared at it without writing a single word, letting the silence settle. Then, almost without thinking, he wrote 2 names. Emily, Daniel. He looked at those names for a long time. Months ago, seeing them written down would have set his blood on fire. Now, they simply reminded him of a chapter that had reached its natural end. He closed his eyes, and memories drifted through his mind like leaves in a stream. The first coffee he shared with Emily, the late-night conversations, the apartment that had once been filled with dreams, then the betrayal, the tears, the lonely, hollow nights beside the river. Every memory was still there. Nothing had disappeared. Nothing had been erased. Finally, Adrian whispered to himself, "I forgive you." There was no audience, no dramatic moment. No one was standing nearby to bear witness to his words. Emily wasn't there. Daniel wasn't there. Only Adrian. And for the first time, he truly understood why forgiveness mattered. Forgiveness was never about pretending that nothing happened. It wasn't saying that betrayal was acceptable. It wasn't about forgetting the pain. Stoicism teaches something much deeper. Holding on to hatred feels like you are punishing the person who hurt you. But in reality, hatred keeps you chained to the very people you are trying to escape. Every angry thought gives them another room to live in inside your mind. Every fantasy of revenge allows yesterday to steal another piece of your today. Adrian realized that he had already lost enough. He had lost the relationship. He had lost his closest friend. He had lost the future he once imagined. He refused to lose the rest of his life as well. As he sat quietly in the park, another sentence from the Stoics rose to his mind. Forgiveness frees the prisoner, and then you realize the prisoner was you. For a long time, Adrian believed Emily and Daniel had trapped him in his pain. Now he understood the truth. They had walked away long ago. The only person still carrying the weight was him, and that weight was a choice. So he made a different choice. He chose peace over bitterness, growth over revenge, freedom over resentment. As he tore the page from his journal, he folded it carefully. He looked at the 2 names one last time. Then he placed the paper into a nearby recycling bin. It wasn't a magical moment. His heart didn't suddenly forget everything, but something inside him became lighter. For the first time since the betrayal, he felt completely free. Not because Emily had apologized, not because Daniel had admitted his mistakes, not because justice had somehow been served. He felt free because they no longer controlled his emotional life. That is one of the greatest lessons Stoicism offers. Forgiveness does not erase betrayal. It removes betrayal's power over your future. The past may always be part of your story, but it doesn't have to remain the author of your next chapter. If someone has hurt you, if someone betrayed your trust, remember this: forgiveness isn't something you give because another person deserves it. It's something you choose because you deserve peace. As Adrian walked out of the park that morning, the sunlight felt warmer than it had in a very long time. He didn't know it yet, but the greatest test of everything he had learned was still waiting for him. Because finding peace is one thing, living as an unshakable person is something else entirely. 3 years passed. If someone had met Adrian for the first time, they would never have guessed the pain he had once carried. The man who had once wandered the streets of London in the rain, broken and questioning his own worth, had become someone entirely different. His discipline had transformed every area of his life. He had earned a promotion and was now leading one of the city's most respected architectural projects. His mornings still began before sunrise. He still ran through the quiet, cool streets. He still read Stoic philosophy every night before bed, not because he was trying to escape pain anymore, but because those habits had become part of the man he had chosen to become. One afternoon, Adrian received an unexpected email. A local university was hosting an event called Building Strength Through Adversity. One of his colleagues had recommended him as a guest speaker. At first, Adrian laughed. "I'm not a motivational speaker," he said to himself. "I'm just an architect." But after thinking about it for a few days, he accepted the invitation. Perhaps someone sitting in that audience needed to hear exactly what he had once needed to hear himself. The evening of the event finally arrived. More than 200 people filled the auditorium. Students, professionals, parents, young couples, people from every walk of life. Some were smiling, while others carried a quiet sadness hidden behind their eyes. Adrian stood backstage, holding a small notebook. Inside were only a few handwritten notes. He wasn't there to deliver a perfect, polished speech. He was there to tell the truth. When his name was announced, he walked onto the stage. The room fell silent. He looked across the audience for a few moments before speaking. "A few years ago, I believed my life was over." The audience listened, their attention sharpening. "I lost the woman I planned to marry. I lost the friend I trusted more than anyone. And for months, I believed they had destroyed me." The room became completely still. Adrian smiled gently. But looking back now, I realize something surprising. They didn't destroy me. They introduced me to the person I was capable of becoming. He paused, letting the words hang in the air. When everything happened, I thought betrayal was the obstacle standing in the way of my happiness. I spent months wishing that night had never happened. I wished I could erase it. I wished life had been fair. He looked around the room, meeting the eyes of the people watching him. Today, I wouldn't erase it. Several people looked at one another in surprise, murmurs rippling through the crowd. Adrian continued, not because betrayal was good. It wasn't. Not because pain is enjoyable. It isn't. But because that painful chapter forced me to ask questions I had never asked before. It forced me to build discipline. It forced me to strengthen my character. It forced me to discover a philosophy that completely changed my life. He smiled. Without betrayal, I would never have discovered Stoicism. Without losing everything I depended on, I would never have learned how to depend on myself. Without pain, I would never have understood the value of peace. He closed his notebook. He no longer needed it. Everything that truly mattered was already etched in his heart. One final thought came to his mind, a lesson he had read years earlier but only truly understood through the fires of experience. The obstacle became the path. At first, those words had sounded impossible. How could pain become a path? How could loss become a gift? How could betrayal become a teacher? Now he knew. Every hardship had quietly prepared him for the person he was becoming. The obstacle hadn't blocked his journey, it had created it. Life hadn't been punishing Adrian, it had been shaping him. Stoicism teaches that we cannot always choose the road before us, but we can choose who we become while walking it. The strongest people are not those who never suffer. They are the ones who allow suffering to refine their character instead of destroying it. Adrian looked across the audience one last time. I don't know what battle you're fighting today. Maybe you've been betrayed. Maybe you've lost someone you loved. Maybe life feels unfair. But don't ask whether this hardship will change your life. It already has. The real question is, will it make you bitter? Or will it make you better? For several seconds, the room remained completely, breathlessly silent. Then, one person stood up and began to applaud. Another joined. Then another. Within moments, the entire auditorium rose to its feet. The applause echoed through the hall, a thunderous wave of recognition. Not because Adrian had given a perfect speech, but because every person in that room had recognized a piece of their own story inside his. As Adrian stepped off the stage, he smiled quietly. Years ago, he believed betrayal had taken everything from him. Now he understood the truth. It had taken away the life he had planned, so life could give him the one he was meant to live. And there was only one final lesson left to share. The lesson that defines the true heart of Stoicism. The lesson that can change not only how you survive pain, but how you choose to live every day after it. The auditorium slowly emptied. People gathered in small groups, talking quietly about Adrian's story. Some wiped tears from their eyes. Others stood in thoughtful silence, processing the words. Adrian remained alone on the stage for a few moments. He looked at the rows of empty chairs. 3 years earlier, he would never have imagined standing here. Back then, he believed strength meant never breaking. Now, he knew something completely different. Real strength begins the moment you allow yourself to break, without allowing yourself to stay broken. As he packed his notebook into his bag, a young man approached him. He couldn't have been more than 20 years old. His eyes were red, as if he had been holding back tears throughout the entire speech. Mr. Cole. Adrian smiled warmly. You can call me Adrian. The young man nodded, swallowing hard. I just wanted to thank you. Adrian waited quietly, giving him space. The young man took a deep breath before continuing. My fiancée left me 4 months ago. I thought my life was over. I stopped sleeping. I stopped eating. I blamed myself every single day. His voice trembled. I came here tonight because someone at work told me your story might help. He looked down at the floor. I don't think I've smiled in months. Adrian placed a gentle, steadying hand on his shoulder. I know exactly how that feels. The young man looked up, eyes searching. So, does it ever stop hurting? Adrian thought carefully before answering, choosing his words with precision. Yes, but not because time magically heals everything. It gets better because one day, you stop measuring your future by what happened yesterday. The young man listened closely, every word sinking in. Adrian continued, you'll always remember. You'll always have scars. But scars are proof that a wound healed. They are not proof that you are still bleeding. The young man smiled for the first time. A small smile, but a genuine one. Thank you. As he walked away, Adrian watched him disappear through the auditorium doors. He realized something beautiful. Years ago, someone he loved had broken his heart. Today, that broken heart had helped another person begin healing theirs. Perhaps that was life's greatest mystery. Sometimes the pain we survive becomes the hope someone else desperately needs. Adrian stepped outside into the cool evening air. The same city surrounded him. The same streets. The same lights. The same river flows quietly through London. But he wasn't the same man who had once wandered those streets in the rain. He had learned the lesson that took him years to understand. Stoicism isn't about pretending that nothing hurts. It's not about hiding your tears. It's not about becoming cold, distant, or emotionless. It's about becoming wise enough to feel every emotion, without allowing those emotions to control your character. It means crying, without giving up. It means loving, without making another person the foundation of your happiness. It means trusting, while accepting that trust can sometimes be broken. It means losing someone, without losing yourself. Because your peace should never depend entirely on another person's choices. It begins the moment you choose to lead your own mind rather than letting your emotions lead you. Adrian looked toward the horizon as the first light of dawn began to appear. A new day was beginning, just as a new life had once begun for him. Not on the day everything went right, but on the day everything fell apart. If you've stayed with this story until now, perhaps you're carrying your own heartbreak. Perhaps someone betrayed your trust. Perhaps someone you loved walked away without giving you the answers you deserved. If that's true, remember Adrian's journey. He wasn't saved because life became easier. He was saved because he became stronger than the pain that once controlled him. And that strength is available to every one of us. Not through anger, not through revenge, not through pretending we don't hurt, but through learning to master our own minds. Because one day, someone will disappoint you. Someone will betray your trust. Someone you love may walk away. You cannot control any of those things. You cannot force people to stay. You cannot rewrite the past. You cannot make someone love you the way you loved them. But you can control something far more powerful. You can decide whether that painful moment becomes the end of your story, or the beginning of the strongest version of yourself. That is the true meaning of Stoicism. Not the absence of emotion. Not pretending that pain doesn't exist, but having the courage to feel everything, and the wisdom to control what you do next. So when life tests you, when the people you trusted let you down, when everything you've built seems to fall apart, remember this: the obstacle may become your path, the wound may become your wisdom, the ending you never wanted may become the beginning you never imagined. And perhaps, years from now, you'll look back on the moment that almost broke you, and quietly whisper to yourself, that wasn't the day my life ended, that was the day I finally became unshakable. If this story touched your heart, remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who may need this message today, because sometimes the right words at the right moment can change a life forever.